first mention of the brand. And the frequency feature, how often user has mentioned the brand in their tweets. For statistical model, we tried a number of classifiers like naive Bayes, SVM, random forest from Weka did a 5-fold cross-validation. And SMO and random forest-based classifiers achieved comparable performance. But in the experiment part, we'll show the result for SMO. Here is the experimental results. I'm showing it for both domain, Delta and Fitbit. As you see, so it's like we built like binary prediction model. So the baseline is about 50%. So we did better than baseline, even though for most of the dimensions it's not like super accurate. It's not like 80 or 90%. But like for some dimensions we did reasonably well, and for some dimensions it is slightly better than baselines. Now, definitely, like when we look at the features and all those things, for some dimensions they are like harder to predict. Like think about attitude, resistance or accessibility. Maybe the text that user has in their tweets, they probably do not have enough predictive power. But there are dimensions like whether user like or dislike, or whether a user is going to buy that service. These are easier to predict. So we got a high result. We did integrate this model to a user interface to build a visual analytics system. The system uses simple keyword filtering. So first, filter users who mention that brand, like who mentioned Delta. We are showing them in the left side, and then we compute this attitude and action dimension by using our model. And so that a customer agent can actually filter the users by sliding the filter, and so that like they can target that users for intervention. So to conclude and mention some future work, this is the first exploration to predict one's attitude towards the brand in terms of a set of characteristics and likelihood to take different actions. Talking about future work, we hope to investigate other forms of ground truth collection. Survey is great, but there could be some reliability issues, and when we are talking about self-report survey. Experiment with more features and the relationships. Here we actually tried simple features from text, but we could actually look for other features like social features, or maybe their personality, and maybe other forms of features we could investigate, maybe their social relationship. Explore how to construct attitude model, which are scalable across multiple brands. In this research, we needed to construct per brand, but can we actually scale it across brand, and can we generalize it further? And definitely apply our models to real-world scenarios, possibly integrate to some products. Questions?
Thank you very much. Once again, just a reminder for asking questions, if you could make your way up to the microphone and introduce yourself as you ask your questions. And the microphone is here in the center of the room. And maybe while people are formulating their questions, just to begin with, you mentioned some other features that you might use. Have you considered things like reputation, social reputation, and influence?
We have not considered them yet, but as I mentioned, that there are a lot of opportunities to look at their followers, number of followees, or like their social graph, maybe their personality, and yeah, we plan to investigate those as we go.
Yes, and I was wondering if you are considering looking at other kind of sentiments, more like specific types, such as frustration with the brand or not trusting the brand and so on and so forth. What would be the challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. So yeah, these are like very interesting suggestions, like looking at more their like emotions and sentiments, whether they're frustrated. So these kind of inner like sentiments, we have not looked at it yet, but as we are also working on emotion identification, so these are pretty related to some thread that we're working at IBM. So we might look at it in near future to see what are the deeper insights we could actually get. And as I mentioned, there might be personality, or maybe their social values. Maybe this might also influence their attitude. So we plan to look at those as we go.
As this was a short paper, we have a shorter question answering slot, so we leave it there and thank the speaker one more time. And we get our next speaker set up. So the next talk is a long paper, and Eduardo will be presenting this.
He was there, yes.
Encouraging diversity and representation awareness in geographically centralized content.
It's HDMI. Okay, sure. Hi, good morning. Well, I'm sorry for the delay. I'm configuring the system. I know the title is very long, but I hope that the presentation is not that long. So my name is Eduardo Graels. I come from Telefónica Research in Chile, and this is work from my PhD thesis at UPF and Yahoo Labs in Barcelona. I was advised by Mundial Almas and Ricardo. Ricardo is here, and this is probably the first presentation he's seeing with me, so I'm a bit nervous, but it's okay. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so let's start. So we know that Twitter is a global platform. It's being used all over the world, especially in my country, Chile. And we also know that people who use Twitter and any other kind of social platforms has cognitive biases, and also that there are systemic biases as well that affects how they use the Twitter and other systems. So in this talk, we analyze the effect of one of those systemic biases of whom people perceive information from Twitter, but also how they interact with user interfaces that display algorithmic information. Particularly, the systemic bias we refer in this talk is geographical centralization. So centralization means that everything, or almost everything, is concentrated in one location. So that means that economical power, media power, political power is concentrated in one location. In our case, it's the metropolitan region, or Región Metropolitana, and the capital city there is Santiago. So for instance, the country has a population imbalance. So you can see in the cartogram that the biggest region is Región Metropolitana, and it holds 1/3 of the population. So this is not bad per se, but if you see how people interact in Twitter, you will find that users tend to send content and receive content from Santiago and Región Metropolitana more than what you would expect given the population distribution. So to put you into context, this is an image of truthsizeof.com, where you can see a map of any country, in this case Chile, overlaid over other countries. And the idea is that you lose the distortion introduced by the Mercator projection. So in this map, you can see that Chile has a length that spans all over Europe, and Santiago will be where Prague is. So imagine that if you live in Madrid and you get only news and only information about Prague, which has a complete different context, cultural context, different weather, and so on. And also, if you try this exercise on the United States, that will mean that people from New York get mostly news from Kansas City. So I'm sure that people from New York would like to read information about their own city and maybe not Kansas. So this problem motivates the following research question. So if does centralization affect how people perceive information and how people behave when browsing informational content in microblogging platforms? And if so, what can we do to encourage different behavior and non-biased behavior induced by centralization? So the first thing we did was to design an algorithm. This algorithm was published in Hypertext 2 years ago, and it focuses on generating a geographically diverse timeline. So this means that we generate a timeline that contains tweets that are relevant in terms of popularity, but from different parts of the country. So every region appears on this diverse timeline. And what we wanted to do was to compare if this diverse timeline was perceived as diverse, as informative, or as interesting in comparison with two baselines. So the first baseline is information entropy, and the second baseline is popularity. Why information entropy? Because the algorithm that we made was based on two previous algorithms published before. One was about information entropy, so you take the features of tweets, location, author, number of followers, and so on, and you diverse based on that. But if you consider, for instance, a big city, you know that this city probably has much more hashtags than a smaller one. So even if you change a hashtag in a tweet from the bigger city, it will have a bigger entropy contribution than changing the city but keeping the hashtag, in the case that you are discussing a popular event, for instance. So this algorithm that enforces this particular feature, that is location, is called sidelines. So the user study consisted on having people being asked which timeline is more diverse, interesting, or informative, and they were displayed side by side. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so this one next. Okay, so in this study, we found 125 users. Of them, only 38 were from not RM. We made a snowball sampling because it was very hard to find users outside RM, and we were in Barcelona, so it wasn't easy to go to Chile. What we did was to create a statistical model, performed some ordinal logistic regression on that model based on the survey answers, and then see what are the differences. The paper contains many interesting results on that, but I will refer up to the most important one, and it's that we found a statistical interaction between location and the algorithm that was being compared. So if you look at the chart on the left, you will see that different algorithms have different scores for the RM location. So we divided users into two groups, RM, or central location, and not RM, peripheral location. So you can see on the left chart that people from outside Santiago consider that all algorithms have the same diversity. However, by design, the algorithm doesn't do that. I mean, the algorithm ensures that all locations are there. So if you are not from Santiago and you see a timeline with only tweets from Santiago, and you also see a timeline with tweets from your own location, you are expected, we expect you to say that this second timeline, which is more diverse, you will perceive it as more diverse, and that did not happen. However, the other attributes, interestingness and informativeness, show a coherent behavior between those groups. So what was happening there? There was something with diversity that we had to tackle, and that's why we had these diversity and representation awareness problems. So for instance, if you look at this picture, it's a picture I like a lot by Magritte. And you see someone looking at the screen, but on the screen, you do not see, he doesn't see the reflection he expected to see. He doesn't see his face. He sees himself is on the reflection, but he doesn't see that. So that's what we propose on the paper. We need to find a way to make users see the results of the algorithm. They are not seeing it. So based on concepts from self-identification theory, we built this definition of diversity and representation awareness problem. And the question is, what can we do to make users aware of that? So the first idea that you may have is, okay, so when you display tweets, which typically display user, content, and date, you might add an indicator of location. And that's what appears on the image on the right. So on that tweet, you see a box with the location and the color assigned to the location. If you look at previous work, so for instance, Sunil Park and others, they found that when you want users to read diverse news, you have to cluster headlines according to aspects of news. So if you cluster the headlines, people will click on different aspects of news and not only the aspect that they care about. However, in news you have few aspects, 2 or 3, at most 4. But here we have 15 clusters. And if you have 15 clusters, you might introduce some positional or screen bias when you display those tweets. So what do we propose? We can use some visualization techniques. Particularly, we took this design by Marcus Westkamp. He has a website that is called NewsMap, where he displayed a tree map of news headlines extracted from Google News. So we did the same thing. In this way, we display headlines or tweets from all over the country, but we do not introduce positional bias in terms of the user does not need to scroll to see all the tweets. Also, a user can select which location they want to see, because we have both buttons to pick a location, and in that case, you see all the tweets in a bigger font, in a bigger size, bigger area. And also, we try to give balance. So popularity is considered when assigning area to each tweet, but also this popularity is weighted according to the inverse of population of that location. So so locations that have a very low population also have their presence in this timeline. Okay, so this looks like the problem is solved, right? But how do we evaluate that? What we did was to implement this in a production system. We crawled tweets and so on. And we built a social bot that is called TodoCL, or Everything Chile, or All Chile. So this algorithm that we had implemented before was running every hour, taking all the tweets from the previous 2 hours, and it generated a geographically diverse timeline. And when it did that, it published a tweet saying, I have a new timeline, I have a new news edition, and these are the users that were featured on this edition. And we published a link to the site. And we also published word clouds with what is being discussed right now, one word cloud per location, or so on. So the idea is that in this way, we can measure, when users access the site, we can measure according to the interaction data, if they click on content related to different locations, if they choose to see only their location, the origin location, using the location filters. So if I'm from a specific region, I can click the button and see the tweets from my region, and that is a signal that I'm interested in that particular location. And also, how many interactions do you make with content? But because we logged everything, so if you click a cell to see more details, if you click a link on the tweet, and so on. So this time, we managed to get more than 1,000 users. However, since we made a desktop application, we only consider desktop users, and at the end, we had only 321 of them. 128 were from outside region metropolitana. Again, we performed some negative and logistic negative binomial on the interaction data, and logistic regression on the probability of looking for a specific location. And the main results that we found, again, there are more results on the paper, you can look at them later. The main result that we found is that the tree map increases everything. There are many factors that explain that, but what we found was that using the tree map, people interacted with more content, people selected more locations, and also the content that they interacted with was from different locations. We didn't find the same statistical interaction as before, but there is a main effect of location, and people from RM don't look at the filter locations. I mean, they do not select their own location. And we think that that's good, because what we want to do is to expose them also to the location of other places. So in summary, what we found here is that users interact with more content from more locations and filter more locations also. And this is a reflection of that we interpret this as a reflection of that they see the diversity on the present on the timeline if they are presented in this way. So what to take away from these results? The first thing is that centralization has effects on how users interact and perceive the information of the system. This might This is not bad per se. Some reviewers asked, okay, so but what's the problem of this? Maybe people want to act in a centralized way. And that's right. So we're not saying that this is bad. What we are saying is that if you design a system, you need to consider that people will not behave the way that you expect if there are systemic biases in their social context. The second one is that algorithms are not enough. We tackled this problem, we designed an algorithm, and in theory, the problem was solved, but users did not see that. So the user interface is very important. And also, the user interface has to be different. You cannot use the typical user interfaces because probably they won't work. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the problem right now. And the third one is that even though the cluster representation using previous work did not work, actually the cluster representation using TreeMap did work. So perhaps there's something in cluster representations that make us perceive information differently. So finally, the last message I want you to take away is that not every culture has the same notion of relevance and importance in content. So even if these platforms are global, you should not apply a global design in all parts of the platform, because different cultures are different, have different ways of interpreting information and interacting with content. Okay, so thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't say that. You can contact me through this address, but we also released the source code on the entire experiment. So you can have the crawler, the different interfaces, everything is there in Python, and with instructions to run your experiment in case you want to find out if your population is centralized. Thank you.
Great, well done. Thank you. So once again, if people want to ask questions, can you make your way up to the microphone and please introduce yourself as you ask your question. So maybe as people are thinking about questions, so there's a couple of things that are going around in my head about this, and maybe just to pick up on one thread. You've talked about some very interesting visualizations, but there's a complexity inherent in these visualizations, and yet the sort of interfaces we're used to dealing with are very simple timeline type interfaces. So how do we bridge that complexity gap? People are used to much simpler interfaces. Do we imagine that services like Twitter would start to incorporate more sophisticated interfaces? And bearing in mind that only a few weeks ago, Twitter started to talk about tweaking their timeline and there was uproar. So users were very sensitive to manipulations and timelines.
Yes, for instance, I think it's not here, this backup slide. Yes, so what we propose on the paper is that Twitter should include these changes, but like in optional ways, and maybe not on the main timeline, but for instance, on search results. So this image shows I was in Korea for dab 2 years ago, and there was an earthquake on Chile, and I searched for the hashtag earthquake Chile, and if you see the everywhere results, you see all the tweets from Santiago, but the earthquake was not in Santiago, it was in the north of Chile. So, but if you search for near me, you don't get any meaningful results. So we propose that you should include here the option to visualize tweets differently so you can find them, but also that if you personalize something, you could personalize the algorithm parameters. Maybe if you are not from the central location, the parameter should be near me, for instance.
Okay, thank you. See.
Yes, maybe you said that and I missed it, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how different are the threads from the different locations. And I'm sure there are some things that are in common, because maybe they talk about things that are at the national level, so the geographical location doesn't matter as much, and there are things that are specific to the location that would make this, that would create differences. Can you say something about that? If you
Yes, thank you for the question. I hope I understood it correctly. There are many things that are of national relevance, so you expect that many people use the same hashtags and so on. And perhaps if some events are happening in these central locations, you would expect that the content from there should be accessed by people outside. But the thing is that there are so many, and since media is concentrated and people tends to mention and repeat people from other locations, they might miss content from their own peripheral locations. So the thing is that currently the platform, Twitter, doesn't allow them to access that, because when they search, they get Twitter centralized tweets because of the relevance algorithm and so on. So that's why you need to diversify and show the tweets in a different way. Thank you.
Just before we take the final question, I'll just ask the next speaker to set up while you're answering that. So if you might plugging out there.
Hi, Stephen Chen from Group Plans at the University of Minnesota. Sometimes I guess we just assume that the diversity is something that a user actually wants. I just wonder, do you have empirical evidence that the diversified interface make user happy? They want more diversity there?
Actually, we do not assume we would like that diversity makes users happy, and I think that happens, but we do not assume that. So what we want to do is that if you want to see biased information, it should be your choice, not the system choice. And then maybe your choice is biased, and we may create algorithms to unbias that too, or using interfaces. So if you're interested in that, you can see my talk tomorrow.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eduardo, one more time.
So, by the way, you pronounce it Kamalzadeh, because I never told you.
That's what I was going to say.
Nice.
Okay. For those who missed the starting session this morning, you may have missed that this is one of the papers who's received the Best Paper Award. So we're delighted to hear this presentation by Mohsen Hamozadeh from the Simon Fraser University and the co-authors from the University of Vienna as well. The title is Tag Flip, Active Mobile Music Discovery with Social Tags.
I just wanted to say it's me that's responsible for the rain, because I come from Vancouver. Just saying. No. Okay. Yeah, as Barry said, this has been a collaboration between me and my colleagues at the University of Vienna, Christoph, Torsten, Michael. So let's talk about music discovery and find out what those colors actually mean on the title. If you look at the music recommendation and streaming services that we have these days, they have over 30 million songs. And if every song was about 3.5 minutes, you would need 200 years to listen to everything nonstop. No one does that, of course. So how do you narrow down what to listen to if you don't really have anything specific in mind? We would say that it basically comes down to two types of tasks. On the left, you would say, well, play something nice for a while. And traditionally, this has been the task of the radio station. And now with the new services that we also have curated playlists, like from Songza and Spotify. We, of course, have recommendation algorithms and services. But if you want to be a bit more directed and controlling in your discovery, we go to the right. And this is the place where what we mostly have is in academic landscapes. It usually boils down to library visualization techniques or critiquing interfaces, explanation interfaces, perimeter weighting interfaces, and so on. We would argue that if you look at the current state of the art, what people actually use mostly falls in the left category, so the logos that are familiar to us. And of course, these are great algorithms and sometimes great interfaces, but they usually suffer from the classical problems that recommendation services have, like not giving you much control. You usually just choose seed songs and then rate items. So they are black boxes, as we had previously in the talks. There's not much transparency for the user. There's also the pigeonholing thing, which means sometimes they can easily trap the user in a taste profile, and you cannot find any way to actually get out of that, to sort of take a left turn if you're using a recommendation service. Moving to the right, like I said, there's been some fantastic work by some of our colleagues actually here, but the issue there is that these interfaces are usually designed for large screens. They are elaborate interfaces for complex interaction, for long sessions of use. They're mostly not actually for music discovery. And finally, they don't really match the scenarios in which we consume music these days, which is mostly through our mobile devices and during commuting or in work. Just to have a few examples of these large screen interfaces, let's show some of them. So this question mark is where tag flip comes in. Basically, our mission was to have these three key pillars be woven together. So high user control, low interaction effort, all on a small screen. In summary of our contributions would be that we talk about the design process and the evaluation process of a tag-based interactive recommendation service, or interface, I should say, which is something that hasn't been done much before, interestingly. We talk about the design choices we had to make, the lessons we learned from these design choices, and the future directions for research in this area. And we also identified the strengths and weaknesses of these interfaces, and how could they actually impact the future of how we access these massive libraries. Okay, on to design. So if we want to have this level of high user control that I talked about, you need a good level of abstraction over the music library to sort of let the user move through the library and navigate based on this abstraction. And for that, your features need to be understandable to the user. You can't use the features that are usually used in music information retrieval research, like timbre and pitch and loudness, that sort of stuff. So that brought us to social tags. And why social tags? Because if you, for example, go to a site like last.fm, there are tons of annotations by users that cover everything you could possibly think about in terms of music descriptors, genres, subgenres, moods, locations, years. This data set is very rich and it's also dynamic. It's evolving. There are words in there that no one but a few music aficionados probably know. So this is a very rich data set to use. In the end, we ended up having 100,000 songs in our prototype. We had 350 tags, which we filtered and processed out of 500,000 tags from last.fm, and the process for doing that is a beast of its own. I'm not going to talk about it here. But in the end, the prototype was done on Android, and let's have a look at it now. So here, the user is searching for some music. So let's say Coldplay, and let me just pause it here if I'm... Okay, where's the mouse? Oh, we don't see the mouse there. Okay, so this is the interface that we had, right? In this interface, the user can actually easily click on each of these tags to choose what they want to get next. So I'm just going to play this video from the beginning because I can't seem to be able to pause it here. So in the bottom, you see the interface is loading, and you get your songs in the bottom right, the number of songs that match these tags. And you also of course, get a list of all the songs that conform to these tags. Now, going back to the interface, okay. On the left, you see the tags of the current song categorized into genre, mood, and others. And on the right, you have the tags that are being considered for a next song. So here, the user just does a few taps, ends up with rock, love, and piano out of the tags that we had for The Scientist by Coldplay, and gets these songs at the bottom right. And you just click on one of them, and that's what you get. So the tags that remain from the previous song that were selected, rock, piano, and love, are here, but the rest of the tag can change. So there are a few key design factors that are involved in designing this interface that I should talk about that differentiate between this and similar approaches. One is high-impact interaction. And to have the sort of low interaction interface and low complexity interface that we wanted, you need to maximize the effect of each of these taps the user makes on the interface. And that is made possible through having these tags that could be diverse for just one song, showing 9 tags instead of just the top like 4 or 3. And then every tap that the user makes can greatly change the sort of music they're listening to, because these are diverse tags and they could move you across the data set, not necessarily in the same neighborhood. But of course, if you wanted to be in the same neighborhood, you could also do fine-tuning, which is another thing that interfaces usually lack. You could take a bunch of tags, keep them, and then have a couple others that you change, and that way you move through this local neighborhood, but don't really change the whole theme that much. There's low interaction effort, of course, because you're mostly just tapping on these tags to get where you want to be. And of course, there's also a low mental load because you already get some options for what you want to listen to. You don't really have to think about the tags that you want to pin. There's transparency, a classic problem of recommendation systems. Here, the user is directly dictating the system behavior, so transparency is in a good shape. And of course, everything is done on a small screen. So the small screen aspect is the thing that makes it all challenging. And we had to make a lot of design choices through this process, through this iterative user-centered design process. I'm going to talk about some of them here. First of all, this left to right flow that we have here from current song to next song was not always here, but we realized that it's very important to form the mental model of the user to understand what's actually going on. So we used to have these blocks for each of the tags, and you would click on those check marks to select them or unselect them. Then we also had this thing where you could choose the strength of each tag in the next song because we have the data for that. But with those sliders here, but that also turned out to be too confusing. For the strength thing, we also had the size of tags that you could change instead of the slider. But that also was too confusing for the user and mostly not needed, actually. Communicating target set sizes. So you see those little gray bars on the right that we don't have in the final interface anymore were meant to show the user proactively what would happen if you would click on each of these tags. Like, how would that affect the size of your final target set, the number of songs shown at the bottom there, so 210 more or 1,000 more or whatnot. That also seemed to be too confusing to the user, and also most users didn't seem to care about that. One thing we did realize people cared about was excluding tags or types of music. So some people said, what if I don't want love songs? What would I do? That's a pretty hard thing to support, and it remains for future research because it's not straightforward. If you just don't have that tag in a song, it doesn't mean the song is not a love song, because these tags are just by nature positive, not exclusive. Okay, so let's move on to evaluation. Of course, the main target of this evaluation here was to figure out if there's room for this type of interaction. It's a very, very crowded landscape of music recommenders. So this is the goal here. And we chose Spotify's mobile application for comparison because it's the most popular there, and most people that we had in our study actually used it in their daily lives. And we had 16 users, 8 female, median age of 26. We had a within subject design, which means every user used both of the apps with alternating order. They had 5 minutes to get familiar with the apps, 10 minutes to do the actual test, and they only had one task: find new songs that you would like and save them. So after each app, they would fill 2 questionnaires, and they also had a post-hoc interview. So the evaluation data that we ended up in the end with was questionnaires, of course, on usability and recommendation capabilities. For usability, we used the SUS questionnaire. It's pretty famous. For recommendation, we created a new questionnaire based on the Rexis contribution called Rescue Framework. I'm going to talk about that later. The interview mainly revolved around the pros and cons of each app and the opinion of the users. And we also did video capture of all the sessions to get an objective idea of the performance of these apps, not just the user opinions. We had 3 high-level hypotheses on these data. First of all, we thought that the overall score that TagFlip would get in the recommendation questionnaire that we had would be higher. We also, based on the video capture, we said that there would be a smaller number of interactions per liked song in TagFlip. So just less interaction to get to what you want to have. And finally, the third one was that we will have more liked songs with TagFlip. So let's look at the results. On the usability side, both apps performed very well and very similarly. So I'm just going to jump to recommendations straight. The questions here were grouped into 4 constructs: quality of recommendations, interface and interaction adequacy, control and transparency, and attitudes and behavioral intentions. So the first one covered topics like how much people actually like the items that were given to them. The second one was if there were enough tools and means in the interface to support them in expressing their preferences to the interface. Third one was, of course, did they feel in control, and did they feel like the system was transparent to them and how it worked? And finally, attitudes and behavioral intentions was, did they trust the system? Did they think they would use it in the future? Looking at the results, in all questions, we had a significantly higher score. Out of 4, we got 3, and Spotify got 2.51. Also, so this was statistically significant in a paired sample t-test. Also, 3 of the 4 constructs were also significantly higher for TagFlip, and we would say that these are the ones that caused the overall score to be higher. So these were control, interface, and user trust. So the first hypothesis was confirmed. Moving on to video capture, we did have a significantly fewer interactions per liked song in TagFlip, 25 average to 35 average. But in the number of liked songs, curiously, they were exactly the same average. And so these bars are 95% confidence intervals. They were also pretty similar. So our second hypothesis was confirmed, lower interaction to get the similar number of liked songs, but the third one, more liked songs, what was not. Finally, moving on to the interview, all 16 participants mentioned that the fact that you give me this much control is very interesting, and I haven't seen that before in interfaces. 11 also said that they really liked the fine-tuning aspect, that they could move in these local neighborhoods of songs, and these users were the ones that were actually most enthusiastic about the app. They also, 8 of our participants also actually also mentioned that the Spotify app that they used was still better for them if they were to listen to just some music, something nice for a while, and not to think about it much. In the end, 7 participants were very enthusiastic about the app. They wanted to have it right there on their phones. 7 others said they were open to using it if they wanted to do more direct discovery. What we get out of this evaluation in a nutshell is that there was higher overall satisfaction, there was high user control and lower interaction, things that we were shooting for in the beginning, and that the fine-tuning ability was very important in user enthusiasm. In conclusion, we think that the landscape of music recommenders, especially in mobile, has been a bit stagnant in the past few years, and the results that we got with TagFlip were very encouraging and could show potentially that there's good potential for tag-based interaction to be a key part of these interfaces in the future. And talking about the future, we could look at finding some solutions to some of the design things that we had here. So excluding tags, how could that be done? Tag strength without making the interface too complicated. We could look at longitudinal studies because for now we have only had a lab study. To actually know how this type of interaction performs in the real world, you'll have to do a long-term study comparing to other approaches. And finally, more advanced algorithmic techniques like excluding music types that I talked about, how could that be done? Or having topic modeling to make the retrieval more robust could be future avenues that we could follow. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So that the mic is open. And maybe to begin with, it's a very challenging problem to offer that amount of user control in a mobile interface. In terms of, I may have missed this early on in the talk, but in terms of the initial presentation of tags, how were they ordered?
Yeah, this is the thing we had with the video. I couldn't pause it for some reason. And so let me just show you. In the video itself. So when you start listening to a song, the top tags of the song are shown on the left, and they're actually categorized into genre and mood and other. So this is to give the user an overall idea of what the song is instead of just listing everything that's out there.
Okay.
So genre is rock, alternative, Britpop, and then
So you could imagine if you had user profiles that you may emphasize tags that matter to that
exactly.
particular user,
That's for
example.
future research.
Yeah.
Personalization could very much play into this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Christina, you're
Yeah,
a
mine is a
regular.
follow-up on that. So how did you actually go? You said that you couldn't talk about it, but I'm really curious about how you went from the 500,000 initial
Yeah.
tags to the small subset.
This is a process that the workflow we made for, so there's a few filtering steps involved, and basically the methods that you have to use cannot really be dictionary based because it's all about popularity, and there could be tags in here that are not in no dictionary. There are very weird tags in last.fm that they actually mean something to the users. So we use these popularity measures, we filter out the non-popular ones, then we figure out what are the composite tags in there, what are the multi-word tags. Then we again filter out the non-popular ones. And then finally, it depends on your use case. So we wanted to not have that many tags here. You could actually go through all of them in the app and look at all of them. You could, but that's an interesting design question. How do you make that presentation better? So yeah, that's it. Basically filtering and NLP algorithms. Yeah.
Peter?
It's exciting to see another example of using tags and recommenders together. I remember my excitement about tag amender system. The difference is that in domain, actually, there are some things which tags are usually replacing for the classic ontology. Tag amenders were used because there's no ontology classifying movies, but there is ontology classifying music. It's what Pandora is doing, right? The music genome. So do you think that we could do the same thing with music genome? Or in fact, the fact that it's tags provided by the user was really critical for your exploration?
So the thing is, that takes a lot of time, right? And Pandora, as I believe, has a limited set of songs compared to other services. And because people are doing that in Pandora, as I understand. And it's hard to get something that's, like through algorithms, it's hard to get something that's understandable to the user, but also descriptive of the music. Of course, there's a lot that can be done. You could auto-tag, like you could propagate tags from songs that do have tags to songs that don't have tags. But yeah, for now, we use the sort of vanilla database from Last.fm. But I do believe interesting things could be done, yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll ask the next speaker to set up. Just perhaps one more question, if I may, unless there's anyone else from the floor. Go far away.
Hello. So that was an excellent interface for exploring some new music, but I was just wondering how your results showed that Spotify was better for a passive listening experience. How you would modify it to maybe make your tag flip application a little bit better for passive listening?
Well, the thing about, so there's an interesting thing about Spotify is that because you don't really know what's going on in the background, that sometimes it's helpful. So you just get a few interesting songs. What we could also have is one of these tags could be similar. You could just tap it, and maybe you could modify how similar to this song and be done with it. Don't do anything else. So that could be a possibility, I think. But I think the better solution in the end is there should be somehow a sort of combination of these two approaches in one place where you won't have to move between things to do it. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
No problem.
Okay, Wilson, thanks very much for that talk. Now, so for our next talk, a subject matter that's very close to my heart, although you rarely see the word expenses and control in the same sentence as far as I'm concerned. But we will be hearing about an expense control system, and Max Altemeyer will be our speaker today, and it's work that was done at DFKI in Saarbrücken.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. My name is Max, and today I'm presenting expense control, a crowd-based, a gamified, semi-automated approach for receipt capturing, and which is work I did together with Pascal Lessel and Antonio Krüger. So today, people interested in getting an overview of their expenses have to gather their purchases manually. So a classical approach for this is using an analog household ledger, as can be seen in this picture here. Besides entering and categorizing all data, all analysis, for example, summing up of entries also has to be done manually. So as a first step towards digitization, software was developed, easing mainly the evaluation part, so you don't need to sum up everything by hand. However, the main burden of adding and categorizing expenses is still a very time-consuming process, leading to the question of how can this process be automated. So one solution is using OCR, optical character recognition, which makes it very comfortable to track expenses simply by taking pictures of receipts. However, there's some problems with this approach. So OCR results heavily depend on the quality of both the picture and the printed text, and that makes it hard to achieve reliable results in domains that are confronted with pale ink, crumpled paper, or text fonts that are hard to recognize. As can be seen in this example, so in which we used Tesseract to extract text from this receipt, and as you can see, this result is far from being perfect. So moreover, there's the question of how articles can be identified and how articles and prices are correlated to each other and how they can be found on the receipt, how a total sum can be extracted, and how a category can be deduced for this overall expense. So to enhance OCR results, we want to make use of crowdsourcing, which relies on the concept of crowd wisdom, stating that a group of people is able to come to a better decision than an individual. And we not only want to correct spelling errors, but also attach meaningful metadata to OCR results by using microtasks that are solved by the crowd. So we developed a smartphone app to track expenses by photographing receipts. Our goals were to digitize this receipt and thereby extract the total sum, store name, articles, and corresponding prices, as well as the user category for this expense. And to master these goals, we make use of microtasks that are delegated to a crowd. Instead of using monetary rewards, we want to motivate the crowd by using gamification. So first of all, I'd like to present some related work in this field. First work is by Kronz et al. From 2011. Digital Code, making old archives accessible using crowdsourcing. They investigated the crowd-based OCR correction approach using gamification in order to digitize old newspaper articles. And in the game itself, words needed to be typed under time pressure to build a bridge for modes. This can be seen in this picture on the left. The gamified approach was very successful. It led to high participation and was perceived very positively by all participants, which somehow supports our concept as well. However, the corrections were not used to improve an algorithm, but only to correct spelling errors of one specific word. The next work is by Louis van Aan et al. From 2008. Recapture human-based character recognition via web security measures. So this approach displays pictures of words that are unrecognizable by OCR to people using web services. And by typing the corresponding word, user can confirm to be human. So thereby one word is known to the system. So in this example, the word morning is an unknown word, and the word overlooks is known to the system. And this is done to prevent spam and determine the reliability of a user. So this approach shows that a crowd is able to increase the accuracy of OCR, and also the reasoning behind the selection and voting processes were very useful for us. So, however, the obtained data was not used to improve recognition. There was no gamification in place, and solving tasks is mandatory. So we want to have participation be voluntarily. Last but not least, I'd like to present the work by Bill Jansen et al. From 2012, Receipts to Go, the big world of small documents. They also aim to digitize receipts by using a smartphone, which is in line with our idea. They used regular expressions to extract, for example, dates and prices. The entity extraction and image preprocessing strategies that were provided in this paper were very helpful for us. However, again, here no crowdsourcing was in place and no error correction methods were implemented, so the system could not improve. The system was not gamified, and single articles and categorizations were not considered at all. So this leads us to the system design. So we based the design of our system on an online questionnaire in which we asked 238 participants to establish requirements for our prototype, and a receipt analysis in which we analyzed 117 receipts from 85 different stores to deduce an abstract model for receipts. And develop an entity extraction algorithm. So due to time constraints, I'm not going into details about these two pre-studies, but focus on our system. So I will explain our system in 3 stages. The first stage is the pre-processing and OCR stage, followed by the entity extraction stage and the post-correction. So first I will focus on the pre-processing and OCR stage. So before the user actually takes the picture, live feedback is given in form of a smiley, which can be seen in pictures B and C. So the smiley is either red or green, depending on how well the current image is. Then we extract the region of interest. This is D, picture D, by identifying horizontally aligned regions in this image on which an adaptive thresholding is performed. Then the OCR engine, we used Tesseract, gets involved and sends the OCR result to our web server. So all pre-processing steps and the OCR itself is done locally on the smartphone. So there's no need to upload the receipt to a web server or somewhere else. So this takes me to the next stage, the entity extraction. So we perform this on the web server by iterating over every line, and we try to find a match in our database. So let's consider we have a line that contains the words Oregon Penwake. We try to find these words in our database using Liebenstein's distance and full text search. And in this case, we have found a match. So we know that Oregon Penwake is American pancake, and it's an article, and the category is groceries. So we then send back this result to the user who uses this app. And for every unknown entity, this is the entities that are red in the picture, a task is delegated to the crowd. So, and now the crowd gets involved in the post-correction phase. So here we have 3 different task types. First of all, picture A, we have the classification task in which the user is asked to say what is depicted on this picture, whether it's an article, total sum, or additional information. So this outcome is then used to match articles and prices as they are not always in the same line. Then there's the article correction task, picture B, in which the user needs to type what he sees. So this is used to store a link between the plain OCR text and the corrected version. And we use this to compensate for typical OCR spelling errors and for future analysis. And then we have the categorization task in picture C, in which the user is asked to categorize the article. So once the crowd solves the task, so a sufficient amount of votes is available, the outcome is stored in our database. So we use the outcome of every task to store it in our database and use it for future analysis. Moreover, the owner of the receipt, so the one who uploaded the receipt, is notified about every correction the crowd performs. So once the crowd corrects an article, he gets a push notification on his smartphone, hey, the crowd corrected your article, Oregon Pancake, to American Pancake. The same goes for the category. So often micropayments are used to motivate crowd work. We instead want to make use of gamification to have a self-sustained system. And the idea is that the more microtasks are solved by the user, the faster he gets corrections by the crowd. So this was also communicated in the app during our study. The game elements we used are shown in the picture beneath. So we have in picture A, you can see that every task that was solved was rewarded by points. We also had achievements or badges for solving an extraordinary amount of tasks. Then there was a personal profile for each user in which the user could see how many points he got, which achievements were unlocked. And there was also a leaderboard in which the users could compete against each other. So coming to the evaluation, we had 12 participants using our app for 3 weeks. The crown truth was derived manually for every line, so we skipped through every receipt and every line and provided the right solution for every task. Gamification was inactive in the first week to acquire a baseline. And we had pre, mid, and post questionnaires before, after 1 week, and after the study to investigate the perception of our prototype and the game elements. So we wanted to find evidence for the following hypothesis. First, our prototype subjectively eases keeping track of expenses. Second, microtasks can be used to reduce the error rate of already captured receipts. Third, microtasks can be used to reduce the error rate of new receipts that are unknown to the system. And last but not least, gamification motivates users to solve more microtasks. Coming to the results, to investigate the first hypothesis, whether our prototype subjectively eases keeping track of expenses, we asked questions in the post questionnaire, and users there stated that the app eases tracking expenses, that they would rather use our system than manually track expenses, and they considered capturing expenses by taking pictures to be easy. So these findings provide evidence supporting our first hypothesis. To investigate H2, we performed the entity extraction algorithm over all receipts after the study was over, using a baseline algorithm and a crowd-enhanced algorithm. So in the baseline algorithm, we did not use any crowd-generated content. And in the crowd-enhanced algorithm, we used crowd-generated content. And the crowd performed significantly better, as you can see in this picture. We had a mean error rate of 31.8% in the baseline algorithm and 10.36% in the crowd algorithm, supporting our second hypothesis that microtasks can be used to reduce the error rate of captured receipts. To analyze H3, whether microtasks can be used to reduce the error rate of new receipts that are unknown to the system, we picked a random subsample with 15 to 150 receipts in 10 iterations, which was our training sample, and iterated over all receipts that were not contained in the subsample, which is then the test sample, applying both algorithms, which means we applied our baseline algorithm, this is the gray line here, without any crowd data, and we applied the crowd-enhanced algorithm. This is the green line. However, as participants claimed to buy the same products, we also performed a participants exclusive algorithm, which means that we used receipts of one user as a test set and the receipts of all other users as a training sample to avoid having same data in the test and training sample. And this is the yellow line. Both crowd algorithms performed significantly better in every subsample size, which supports our third hypothesis. Last but not least, to examine H4, whether gamification motivates users to solve more microtasks, we considered the average amount of solved tasks per user in every week. So in week 1, participants solved 238.75 tasks on average. And remember that in week 1, there was no gamification in place. In week 2, we had average amount of 569.75, and in week 3, 475.75. So we found a significant effect between week 1 and week 2, as well as between week 1 and week 3, which provides evidence for our last hypothesis that gamification motivates users to solve more microtasks. However, gamification did not motivate all users to, as 2 participants did not solve microtasks independent of whether gamification was active or not. So overall, our results are quite promising. So our approach subjectively eases keeping track of expenses. The error rate is significantly reduced, and gamification led to higher participation. However, not all participants were motivated. So therefore, in future work, we want to revise our gamification concept in order to motivate a broader range of users and make microtasks more fun and engaging. And we want to release the app in the market to investigate long-term effects, to test in how far the error rate further decreases and whether gamification can be used to motivate users over a longer time span. So with this, I want to end my talk, and I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you. So once again, the microphone.
I'm Massimo Zancanaro from FPK.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting work. I have 2 questions. One is, did you consider using as a baseline the user acting on his or her own receipt?
So without
Just as a
using
task,
any
rather
crowd data, so just correcting the errors
in his own receipts. And the second one is in the last slides, when you have the averages, it looks like the third week you have decreases actually. So the second week, so that means that people
you mean
this
this
novelty effect, and then it's fade away, or is it a different interpretation?
So considering the first question, we to acquire a baseline, we went through every receipt and every line and provided a ground truth for every entity. So we did not investigate participants solving their own tasks. So this was not done. Considering the second question, so here, this is somehow a quite, or this happens quite often with gamification, this effect. So this is somehow, could be somehow a novelty effect here. So we have the phenomenon that the first week there's, or in the second week, there's a huge or much more tasks that were solved, and this goes down in the third week. So therefore, in future work, we need to have a longer time span than 3 weeks. So 3 weeks are not enough to roll out any novelty effects that could occur. So yeah, this.
Hi, I'm Bart. Good idea, I think. Very interesting way of combining lots of different things. I wanted to follow up on this question over here.
Yeah.
I think one thing, like the main point that you're trying to make is that it's, or kind of the assumption here is that it's annoying for users to correct the receipts. And I could imagine that. Like I have tracked stuff over time, and if I have to do too much manual work, I won't do it. So I think one reason to compare against a user manually doing it is not just to have the users create the manual baseline, but also if you have like 50 or 60 users and you let half of them do the manual correction and the other half not, you could compare the usability or the satisfaction between these two systems. Because what you have now is they say, well, a 4 out of 5 point scale, I like this system. But you don't really know whether it's better with or without this gamification, without this automated aspect. And I think that would be a very interesting study to kind of statistically prove that having that automated feature really keeps users in the loop and keeps using it, rather than tossing it away after having to correct too many things.
Yeah, so we had this pre-study with the this online questionnaire. I didn't focus on that, but there we asked people why they are not keeping track of expenses, and they stated that they are very interested in keeping track of the expenses, but it's too much work, and therefore we thought of having a crowd. So for some people, gamification is very motivating, and they are doing a lot of work, and others can then get corrections from these people without having to manually add or edit the expenses. So
but doing it kind of as an A/B test with like some users using one version and some users the others, and still having those questions would be
interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
I wonder as well, one of the challenges, of course, is incentivizing people and motivating people, and your closing comment suggests that you're well aware of this. And the gamification that you've introduced gives them scores, but is that enough intrinsic motivation to keep them playing the game? And often with these games with a purpose, rather than just gamifying these systems, there's a competitive element. So you could imagine a scenario where two players are playing against each other to try and decode a receipt the fastest. And did you consider elements of that?
Yeah, so actually we try to provide more intrinsic motivation by telling the people that solving microtasks, if they do much for the crowd, they get faster corrections by the crowd. So this was mainly the idea, to have some intrinsic motivation, so not only points with no reason. So this was definitely one idea. And we also had this leaderboard as competition. Most of the times, or works for a lot of users. But again, competition can also have detrimental effects. So can be quite frustrating if you're always last. And
another intriguing opportunity, I think, is that if people are photographing their receipts at the time those receipts are produced, then they'll have geographic information attached to those receipts. You could give those receipts to the crowd based on location. And the added benefit for the crowd is that they're then discovering the prices of things in the places that they live.
Yeah, that's quite interesting, So we actually, currently we are still working on this, and we also considered to have somehow more benefits for the user, so that you can compare prices with local supermarkets.
Here's the cheapest latte,
So, this is very interesting.
Okay, great. Okay, if there are no more questions, can we just thank Max one more time, please?
Thank you very much.
And we'll move on to our final talk in this session. It's a short paper on exploring user attitudes towards different approaches to command recognition in feature-rich software. And the speaker will be Andrea Bunt today. And the work has been done at the University of Manitoba in Canada.
Oh, okay, great. So sadly, my last name is not actually German. It's just Bunt. People really like it to be the Bunt cake, which unfortunately isn't. Okay, so I'd like to just start by acknowledging my co-authors, Michelle Wiebe and Denise Geiskowicz, both students. I've never had so much trouble convincing a student to come to California before to present, but this time I did, so you have me instead. Okay, so to start off, what do I mean by feature-rich software? So this is software like Microsoft Word, or even more complex, something like AutoCAD, where there are literally hundreds of commands and options for people to choose from. And so what people have seen, including myself when studying how people use these applications, is typically they use a very small subset. So something on the order of 5 to 10% is what we see time and time again. And so the question is, what can we do to help users become aware of other commands that might be out there for them? One approach is to augment these systems with recommender systems. And what a recommender system means in this context is you have a user, you see what commands they're using, the system does some internal processing as to what else might be relevant to that user, and generates some recommendations. And these are typically put in an area of a location of the interface where they can consult them at their leisure. So this isn't a a paperclip type of scenario. And what we're going to be looking at in this paper is two very different ways of determining command relevance and how users respond to those approaches. Okay, so the first approach is what I'm going to be calling a social recommender, in that it looks at what others in the community of users are using. So it has some usage logs from people who are using the application, and it looks at what the individual is using and what others have been using, comes up with like-minded individuals, and generates some recommendations for other commands that seem to be relevant to those types of workflows. And this is an approach that was explored by a group at Autodesk Research. Okay, last year, we looked at a different data source for determining command relevance. So if you go to Google or your favorite search query and type a how-to query for a particular application, how to do pretty much anything, you'll find a whole bunch of web documentation that describes particular workflows. And so what we can do is we can mine those web pages for references to commands and use those as a sense of what commands tend to go together. Again, compare those to the user's workflow and say, you know, web documentation says that these other commands tend to go with the ones that you're using. And this is something we looked at last year in a system called QFREX. Okay, so what are the differences between these two approaches? So they could generate very different types of recommendations, potentially, but just building on the keynote, I'm going to replace what was said there with what I was originally going to say, which is sometimes the explanations are actually more impactful than the differences in the recommendations themselves. Okay, so how could these two different approaches explain their recommendations? So I'm going to apologize right now for this screenshot. I thought I had a higher res version than I actually did. So here's an example of where you could have a box somewhere in the interface where recommended commands are listed along with the system's confidence. For a social recommender, so one that uses data from other people, you can supplement those recommendations with things like percentage of all users who are using this command and percentage of like-minded users. For a task-based approach, we can go back to those original websites where we mined the command groupings from and give the user a sense of what other tasks or what tasks these commands seem to be used in. Okay, and the question that we were interested in is essentially how do users respond to these two very different ways of explaining command recommendations. So we performed a qualitative study. I'm going to go through the method really quickly, referring you to the paper for the details. So we had 16 participants. They completed a total of 4 tutorials in the GIMP software, so an image manipulation package. 2 of these tutorials were with the social recommender, making recommendations as they worked. 2 of them were with the task-based recommender. We implemented the algorithms as described in the original papers, but we tweaked the output a little bit to make sure that the recommenders were equally helpful in all cases. And then we were particularly interested in user attitudes, so our primary source of data collection was questionnaires and semi-structured interviews. Okay, so a quick overview of the findings, again, hoping that you'll take a look at the paper for more detail. We didn't see a strong winner, so preferences were almost evenly split between having these recommendations made based on this social data and based on web documentation. When we looked at why people preferred one or the other, so I should say they were split, but people were not indifferent. They tended to have actually quite strong views. One of the really sort of polarizing things was how people felt about popularity of a command. So we had some people feel that, you know, if others are using it, it must be useful, versus how do I know that others aren't sort of doing suboptimal things and I would just be doing the same thing. People who liked the task-based system really valued this additional context of how the command might be used. In both cases, we had concerns that the system was maybe not choosing the right subset of the data for determining relevance, so either the right peer group or the best tutorials. Okay, so this was one study. There's a lot left to be done in this area. In terms of evaluation, we evaluated the systems in a very task-centric way. So people were doing tasks and they got recommendations. And we might see very different attitudes if we looked at a more exploratory learning context, where the person was sort of sitting down and thinking, what might I like to learn today? Ultimately, we're interested in whether or not these different ways of making recommendation influence users to learn more of the software, and that requires a field study. But we think we've identified a couple of interesting areas for system development. First, looking at how to combine. There's no reason why these approaches can't coexist, and so looking at ways to combine them. And also ways for users to maybe identify sources of data that they want to have used as part of the recommendation. So either looking at specifically peer groups or maybe repositories for tutorials on the web that they know are good. Okay, so with that, I'll just acknowledge funding sources and happily take any questions.
Great, thanks very much, Andrea. Sure.
Hi.
Osimo Karim from Haifa University from Israel. And I was wondering, did you check for gender bias and for people who perceive themselves as leaders versus social people?
I think those are really interesting ideas. We didn't have a large enough sample to really tease out what is it about the person and their perspective, on the world that's causing them to prefer one versus the other. But I think that's a great area for follow-up work.
Right, okay, thank you.
So in the study, did they see the explanations or they had to access them?
They had to click on them, but
So-
they did.
So most of them actually looked
Yeah.
at the explanations?
Yeah.
You didn't? Okay.
They had to. The reason why, see if I can get back to, reason why a lot of people did click on them is because in addition to the actual explanation, there was also information about how to use the command, and people often looked at that for help on how to
Okay,
use the
so you
command.
don't have a sense of how much they would have looked at the explanations if they didn't have that.
No,
additional
so we
data.
didn't have eye tracking technology. We do have click data on the exploration of the recommendations, and they were looking at them. But no, we don't
So
have
you
a
didn't
sense
try
of.
a version in which the
No.
description wasn't
No,
there? Okay.
we didn't.
I'm puzzled the reason of the split. Did you try some kind of trusting propensity when we study social recommendation? We typically collect the data because some people tend to trust others, some just don't. Or maybe
Yeah.
something else, I don't know, time issue, because we know that people trust others when they don't have time to think themselves. So any explanation on your side?
Yeah, so no, we didn't collect that. We did collect the degree to which people trusted the recommendations and saw a little bit more in favor of the task-based, but not enough to, I wouldn't say there was a difference there. Honestly, this surprised us. When we first started doing this study, I actually thought it was going to be heavily in favor of the task-based system. I thought that was going to be seen as much more helpful in terms of knowing what to do with this recommendation. And so now that I see that there's so much support for the social version, I'd actually like to, as you say, get a little bit more of a sense of why.
Okay, one more quick question.
Just wanted to know if there was any confusion over the size of these bars for people, because looking at it first,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know what that means. Right?
Yeah, so we did explain this to people, which I didn't explain in the talk. The size of the bar is system confidence. So it's how confident the system is in it.
Before they started? Or?
Yeah, so we did explain what the bars were.
Okay.
Yeah. And we didn't see any expression over confusion about that. But again, that was consistent that didn't vary between the conditions. So both conditions had that bar.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. I know we're hitting up against lunch break, so we'll just thank Andrea one more time for another immaculately timed presentation, I must say.
All right, so we have 2 hours for lunch now, or almost 2 hours for lunch. The next session starts at a slightly weird time, starts at 1:45. So be back here at 1:45.